Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today. I'm really excited to speak to you about technology, how that's impacting industries and ecosystems of companies and partners, and how APIs are actually driving that digital revolution. By way of a quick introduction, my name's Alex Walling. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Rapid. At my core, I'm a technologist. I love programmers, developers, but I love seeing how those things can impact business and technology. I've been with Rapid for about 7 years, and you can find me on most social media at Alex Walling. I'd love to connect and talk more after the session here today. So, like I started to allude to, I'm really going to start talking about how technology and software are driving innovation, how industries form into ecosystems of players operating together, driving the most amount of value, how APIs are used for abstraction and as interfaces to drive that kind of value within the organizations, and how we ultimately unlock the maximum amount of business value in these corporations. And I want to start the talk here today with this quote. It's matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move. And you might be wondering, what does this have to do with technology? What does it have to do with APIs? But what I want to use this for is I actually adapted it into a bit of my own quote, where industry dictates how software is built, and software dictates how industries operate. And you'll start to understand this throughout the course of my talk. But ultimately, I believe that the best technology solutions ultimately become ubiquitous. They rewrite the rules of how we live our lives, how businesses operate. And I have a few examples of how this has happened in the past. First, in January of 1880, Thomas Edison received the historic patent for the universal domestic use of the electric light. And today, that word electric light sounds odd because ultimately it's evolved into we just call it lighting. It's not that electric light. It's become ubiquitous. It's everywhere, always on, um, and we've kind of evolved as a people. Next up, we look at cell phones, and now we just call them phones. It's kind of evolved into just day-to-day operating. You no longer really think about it. Then we look at online shopping. Amazon really drove a huge part of this movement. And again, I don't really call it online shopping anymore. I just call it shopping. I go online, I look for the detergent I need or the protein bars that I want. I ship them right to my door. And this new platform not only has changed how I think about shopping, but it's how we changed how we think about shipping and delivering. It's changed the logistics industry and packaging. It's changed home security and insurance to cover the packages that you're delivering. So once again, industry dictates how software is built, and software dictates how industries operate. These examples have fundamentally changed how we work and live our lives day in and day out. So now let's look at an industry where it's really gone from a single industry into an ecosystem of companies driving that industry forward. And I love movies. I love going to the movie theater. If you look at most urban cities, you'll actually see these historic movie theaters. They'll have names like Fox, Paramount, Universal, and these are all names that we now associate with kind of movie production. Well, why is that? Well, it's because when movies first came about back in the early 1900s, the film industry was a single stack. The film studios owned everything from the actors to the directors, and they also owned the distribution, those theaters that you actually got it out into the audience. That was until this studio was created, the United Artists Studio. And this is where the actors and directors ultimately thought they were deserved more of the profits, and they wanted to share it equally, not just with the film studio, but with the artists actually creating the films. And this was ultimately created by these four artists: Douglas Fairbanks, famous actor; Mary Pickford, the first female star in silent movies; Charlie Chaplin, uh, a famous comedian; and D.W. Griffith, one of the first blockbuster directors kind of the Steven Spielberg of his time. And these are the four people who created the United Artists back in 1919. And this was the first kind of segmentation of the stack. So now you had the production companies, so the United Artists, who were the actors and directors creating the movies, and then you had the distribution. So you still had the film studios owning the theaters and how those movies got in front of the consumers. Then once again in 1933, there was another split. The actors wanted more leverage. They wanted more negotiating power. And so the Screen Actors Guild, or SAG, was created to enable them to drive better working conditions and better pay. And so once again, they split into three layers. So you had the actors, you had the production companies, and then you had the distribution companies. Then once again in 1948, there was a major lawsuit that the 8 major motion picture companies had conspired to control the entire motion picture industry. And this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, where it was ordered that they needed to split between the distribution and exhibition. So either they needed to divest their distribution and operations or divest their theaters. So once again, you had a split. And this is very, very early days in the film industry still. And today it's gotten even more complicated. You have in-home media, distribution, marketing, post-production, production, acting, directing, screenwriting, and all of these different layers operate and kind of work together to actually get the movie to you in your home theater or wherever you might be viewing your movies. And so with all of this, you might be thinking, well, what does APIs have to do with this? Well, APIs fundamentally are not just another piece of software. An API is an interface to communicate with, an ecosystem of producers and consumers. It's why we talk about the API economy. And finally, it's a relationship with the developers consuming your APIs. So it's much more than just software driving innovation. It helps work in these ecosystems. And so frequently, we often draw these APIs as connectors. We link the different API calls together. And I agree that this is how they technically work, but is that really what we should be thinking about? Are they really connectors, or are they more so abstraction layers of the backend data and software? And we've seen abstraction layers so often in software. You look at Microsoft and needing to abstract away the backend hardware. So it doesn't matter what CPU you're running or what GPU you're using, the software still looks the same. And so it abstracts away that interface. Adobe, it abstracts away the backend file editing software into this much more intuitive user experience. Google Maps enables complex software mapping capability, but in an easy to use, often consumed via API. Stripe, it's kind of synonymous with payments today, and it's how most organizations actually do their billing and payments. And these abstraction layers become massive and ultimately extremely valuable. There's an estimated 1.5 billion Windows users. Adobe Acrobat has been downloaded 1 billion times and ultimately edits around 16 billion different documents each year. And this continues to happen in many different industries. Credit cards, there are 2.8 billion created worldwide and over 400 billion transactions processed. So how do we look at this in the API economy? Well, I think it's important for us to define what is the API economy. I had a candidate I was interviewing a few months back, and he asked me the question, "What's your definition of the API economy?" And I sat there and thought about it for a while, and ultimately I didn't really have a great answer that I'd worked on producing. So I spent a couple of weeks looking through definitions, and this is what I came up with. The API economy encompasses all activity related to the production, consumption, and trade of APIs amongst businesses. And all of those words are important. It shows the two-party system, the production, so API providers, and consumption, so API consumers. The trade of APIs. I don't say monetization. I don't say any other words. I talk about the trade. So some APIs are offered for free because they drive stickiness of the platform. Some APIs are offered for direct monetization. And this sort of complexity really is what drives the trade and commerce of APIs. And it's not just us at Rapid saying this. It's what many industries, McKinsey, Cornerstone, Forbes, the New York Times, the telco industry, open banking, insurance companies, every modern enterprise company is talking about APIs and thinking about how they unlock the maximum amount of value. So let's look at an example that I really like. I'm a huge traveler. I travel both for work and as well as personally. So how does the airline industry think about APIs? Well, if you look over on the right-hand side, this is kind of a standard boarding pass. This is through United, and you're kind of thinking, oh, it's a simple graphic. It's got a QR code for me to be able to scan my boarding pass and understand, am I allowed on this flight? But what you might not know is there's actually 10 to 20 different APIs all used to be able to verify the information on this boarding pass. You call the TSA to understand, are they a TSA pre-check verified customer? You call the loyalty program to see what loyalty level they are. You call the airport to understand which gate's being used. You call the airline to understand what fare class they're in. And here's just a bit more of a detailed example of all the different APIs used to actually pull this boarding pass. And so as a consumer, you might only see the airline. You might be flying with United, Emirates, Lufthansa, whatever airline you're flying. But what you don't see as a consumer user is all of the different companies and organizations behind the scenes actually coming together to deliver that consumer experience. So this is kind of a classic ecosystem driven industry. And it's really important for these companies to drive the maximum amount of value. And what do I mean by that in terms of APIs? Well, we at Rapid developed this kind of path to optimizing and ultimately unlocking the maximum amount of value from your API program. So we see companies at every stage of this journey. Some companies are just getting started, really understanding what they have. So they're in that kind of the white section where it's the creation and ultimately cataloging of APIs to know what services are available, and then once you have that underway, you can start to look at kind of the green section, where it's really driving towards building that robust ecosystem of partners and consumers. And those consumers could be internal consumers, they could be external third parties. But these are some of the steps that we see companies needing to take. So first is kind of developing and aligning on a marketplace. Again, to facilitate that two-party trade of APIs amongst your third-party partners. Then we get into the governance and administration. You need to make sure there's standard setting. You need to make sure there's common object models. But it's important to not just think about delivering a great technical solution. You need to make sure developers actually know where the APIs are and drive that real engagement. So you need to start to think about looping in your marketing partners to be able to open up these APIs more broadly. And these are some of the things that actually build to that robust ecosystem of consumers, customers, partners, all working together. And then the last step is really realizing revenue. And I say API revenue instead of API monetization very specifically. Again, back to that idea of kind of the trade of APIs is very complex. There are some APIs that don't work for direct monetization. Some APIs need to think about a revenue sharing model or indirect monetization. So maybe you offer it as part of your broader platform to drive stickiness and adoption, but you're not going to charge for every single API request. So there's a lot of different revenue models that we work with our customers around to actually unlock. And ultimately, the reason for doing this is to drive innovation, letting us all work together and be more innovative and effective at what we're doing. So this all leads me to kind of one of our great customer examples of IATA, where they're working with us to define standards and onboard APIs from the entire airline industry to make it a much more effective uh, industry as a whole. But this isn't just happening within the airline industry. It's happening with banks, insurance companies. And so here's a graphic that shows kind of the change from all the way back in 2001 to 2021, where back in 2001, two of the top most valuable companies in the world were really ecosystem companies. But then you look to 2021, and all of a sudden, 8 of the 10 top most valuable companies are ecosystems working with partners and driving trillions of dollars in revenue each year. And so again, I mentioned that this is happening in banking as well, where with open banking, with fintech, you want to be more kind of modern and driving connection between the different partners. So here's kind of a quick branded example of what that could look like for a bank and insurance company. And really the driving factor is to be able to connect and deliver the right consumer experience to your partners and to your customers. And the last example I'll look into is really telco. I sit on my phone way too often, and it really is one of the most innovative industries in the world. And we were actually at Mobile World Congress a few months back, and this was the front page news of the Mobile World Congress daily. Global players grasp API opportunity. It was identified as one of the most important topics of the entire event. And there was an entire hackathon that took place, enabling developers to build and use APIs. And Nokia was the front runner in that hackathon, where if you don't know, the telco industry is moving to 5G. And the difference between 4G and 5G isn't just more bandwidth, it's not just faster, but 5G actually means programmability on the network. So Nokia is working with telcos to find new ways to monetize the networks, whether it's through drones or another example that I want to walk through, which is kind of shipping harbors where large cargo ships are coming in and out of port. But what they actually identified is that there's tens of millions of dollars of payload, but there aren't enough captains to actually get these boats from out to sea into port. So what's the opportunity here? Well, there's actually a new way to be able to enable these pilots to drive these ships remotely. But you might be wondering, how do they actually connect to the boats? You need reliable network. You cannot have blackouts. You need increased bandwidth. So how do we do that? It requires a stack of partners to actually deliver this service. At the top, you have the service company that provides the captains to be able to remotely navigate and drive these ships into port. Then you have the local telco companies. In this case, it was Telenet, which is owned by Liberty Global, which actually provides the bandwidth slicing, guaranteeing high bandwidth, no blackouts, location services, all to be able to accurately track where these container ships are. Then you have the software company, IMEC, that actually created this software that the pilots use to be able to navigate into port. Then you have Nokia and their programmable network as code platform, which ultimately is powered by Rapid, which we're really proud of to be able to drive this type of innovation in the telco industry. And then Nokia obviously owns those physical networks to actually provide the high availability communications. So once again, in summary, I think this quote really summarizes it really well, where we're seeing a shift in industries and the software they're building. And we believe that this is going to change everything about our day-to-day lives, how we operate in business, how we operate in our personal lives. And I think APIs truly are at the core of driving that innovation forward. So with that, once again, I'm Alex Walling from Rapid. I'd love to connect. If there's any questions you have, if there's anything I or the Rapid team can do to help, connect with me, visit rapidapi.com/enterprise. And I really appreciate your time today and hope you learned something interesting.